The NHL trade deadline was full of excitement. Teams across the league are either blowing it up or gearing up for a deep playoff run. Welcome back to another edition of Penn State Sports Night. I'm Jacob Cheris, and alongside me is Chris Lemmo and Mac Young. So guys, obviously the biggest name of the 2022 trade deadline was Flyers captain Claude Giroux. He was dealt to the Florida Panthers in exchange for Owen Tippett and a couple of picks. Chris, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the move?
Well, I'll skip the sob story here because this is Penn State Sports Night, not Penn State Sports Therapy Night. Though, again, great idea for a show. I kind of do need that. But beyond the point, the Flyers obviously failed Giroux. I mean, look, when you look at the highlight of his career, he looks like a baby. I mean, he just came into the league, and that's when they lost the cup to the Blackhawks on a goal that, quite frankly, I'm still not sure actually went in the net. But it's tough to say that they really could have gotten anything more. Look, I'm the first person to blame Chuck Fletcher, as you've heard me say before. But when, G really backed them kind of into a corner here, and I don't blame him at all. When you're a veteran of that caliber, you get to pick where you want to go. He had the full no-trade clause, and from what it sounds like, now, this wasn't confirmed yet, but from what it sounds like, he was really only going to waive it for Florida. So even though they might have had better offers elsewhere, that's the deal they had to do. So yes, should they have gotten more in return? Probably. Could they have? I don't know if they really could have. Now, the picks are nice. Owen Tippett, I thought, had a great first game. As Max said before, he's got the ginger hair going, so fits in very well with the culture. But overall, I don't think it's a bad return. He's a former first-round pick himself. He was one of their highly touted prospects, and playing on a team that's not as deep as Florida, I think he'll have a lot more of a chance to thrive in Philadelphia.
Yeah, Chris, I think he made a lot of great points. Claude had that no-move clause, so he was always going to have control where he wants to go. Reports came out that Boston and New York might have had better offers, but Giroux overall only wanted to go to Florida. Even Colorado was thought to be in the mix, but it kind of backed Chuck Fletcher into a little bit of a corner. And while guys like Florida traded for, like Cheris went for a first-round pick, and Giroux might have been way more valuable, the Flyers only got a future, not even this year or next year's first-round pick. It's a 2025 first-round or 24 first-round pick, which could become 2025 if it's in the top 10. But Giroux overall, great career in Philadelphia. Obviously couldn't get that cup. And the Flyers, the main goal, they wanted to get him to a place where he would have that opportunity. And Florida is one of the deepest teams in the league, one of the best teams in the league this season. So they're going to have a pretty good chance to win the Stanley Cup this season. So I think Claude Giroux's going in the right place where the Flyers want to see him go. And in return, like Chris said, Owen Tippett, not a bad prospect. He's getting playing time right away in the top lineup since the Flyers trade a lot of the veterans, and first-round pick in the future is always going to help as well. So not as great a deal as it could have been for the Flyers, but still they got a decent return and a good send-off for their captain.
Yep, and the Cats are looking like a legit Stanley Cup contender now. You got Alexander Barkov, who's one of the most underrated players in the league, at your first-line center, and Claude Giroux as your second-line center. That's pretty good, and also Jonathan Huberdeau on the wing. Giroux can also play on the wing, so it's Stanley Cup or bust for the Florida Panthers. Another deal that I want to talk about is Marc-Andre Fleury going from the Chicago Blackhawks to the Minnesota Wild. And Minnesota, they definitely needed goaltending help because Cam Talbot is struggling. Mac, I'm going to take it to you. What are your thoughts on the deal?
Yeah, Chicago is a little more confusing. I'll talk about them in a sec, but great for Minnesota, who's kind of been a little bit of a limbo. They're still in a playoff spot right now, but goaltending's been a struggle. Marc-Andre Fleury going for one last run, kind of like Giroux. He had a no-move clause as well. In Minnesota, he said, I saw an interview today, he said, Minnesota's close. His family's going to stay in Chicago. He's going to go to Minnesota. It's not too far away, so he's happy that he's on a playoff team that's not too far of his family. He didn't want to get up and move again. But for the Chicago Blackhawks, I'm kind of confused with what they're doing right now. They kind of came into this year, they signed Seth Jones to that huge contract. They kind of acted like they're a team, almost like the Flyers in the offseason, where they're like, oh, we're just retooling and we're going to make a big playoff push this season. But it's kind of fallen apart, and now they trade Brandon Hagel to Tampa Bay for a huge haul, 2 first-round picks, 2 prospects, and, acting like kind of they're in a full rebuild mode. But Patrick Kane, whose name was kind of whispered about in the trade deadline, maybe could get moved, and it never happened. So it's kind of hard to determine what Chicago is trying to do right now. Getting picks and prospects, which I think was great in the Hagel deal, but trading away veteran goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury as well, but then not moving on from Taser Kane yet, or kind of still trying to act like they want to contend and still just retool. But it might be time for a full-on rebuild in Chicago with the state after this trade deadline.
Yeah, I would agree with you there on your point. That's actually a great comp with Chicago and Philly. To retool, you actually have to be good, and neither of those rosters were really good in hindsight. But Minnesota, this is a big upgrade for them. Talbot and Kakkonen were good. They were serviceable for most of the year. They're 4-9-1 in their last 15 or so games. That's really the problem, is that they've really struggled of late. They've let up, I think it was like 65 goals over that span. Talbot also has like worse than a minus 16 expected goals against, or expected goal average there. So he's really struggled of late. And to be quite honest, the West, outside of Colorado, is pretty open. I don't think that there's really anybody that Minnesota roster outside of Colorado can look at and say, oh, they're a lot better than us. So this move really, I think, is a direct kind of shot at Colorado. It's saying, look, we realize that Colorado has that offensive firepower. We need to have a starting goaltender that's been here, who's won a cup, and that's exactly what Fleury brings.
Yeah, and I like this move a lot for the Minnesota Wild. They needed an upgrade in goal. They also traded Kaapo Kähkönen, like you mentioned, to the San Jose Sharks. They're one of those teams that's on the up and up. You got Kaprizov, you got Fiala, Zuccarello's having a career year, and then on the back end, Matt Dumba, Jared Spurgeon. Now you have Marc-Andre Fleury. This team can pick it back up, and it's going to be hopefully a deep playoff run for the Minnesota Wild. But out of all the trades, there was, I believe, 31, which is one of the busiest deadline days in NHL history. Chris, I'm going to take it back to you. Who's one winner and one loser for this year?
Well, the winner's got to be the Florida Panthers with, of course, our guy Giroux. I really think that this is obviously his best chance to win a cup, and I really think that they can. I mean, I look at that roster on paper. They can compete with Tampa. They can compete with anybody, really. And not only that, but what Florida did, yes, I get that they don't have their picks, basically their top 3 picks for the next 3 years, but that roster's young, so they really don't need it. It's not like they're an old roster like a Washington where you need your picks. They don't need it, so they're fine going forward. I don't think this is necessarily mortgaging the future for anything here. I really love what they did. They got Ben Sherratt is going to be a great defenseman there. And, of course, Giroux really lengthens that lineup there down the center. I mean, he's been one of the best face-off men in the league now for a decade. So really like what they did. Now, if you really want to see, in terms of the teams that did the worst at the deadline, I mean, it has to be the Edmonton Oilers. You look at a team that has top-end talent, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, okay, and you're wasting their primes. They haven't been able to come up with anybody big to help that team out, especially in net. Both of their goalies, talk about a team that could use Fleury. Now, I don't know if he would have waived his no-movement clause, but they could use a goalie. I mean, they're legitimately a goaltender away from really being in the middle of this in the West, but instead they chose to do basically nothing out there. I mean, yeah, Derek Brassard's fine, another Flyer legend, Derek Brassard, but all in all, I think they should have done more to help out their 2 main guys there.
Yeah, good points there, Chris. I like those teams a lot. For me, my biggest winner of the trade deadline is our newest team, newest franchise in the NHL, the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken, they made a lot of different moves, a lot of little moves, a lot of subtle moves that I feel like a lot of people kind of overlooked because the big dogs like Giroux and Sherratt, like you said, were going to Florida, and the Hagel deal for Tampa. But Seattle now has 34 picks over the next 3 drafts, a ridiculous number. And look, Vegas kind of changed up the perspective. They kind of ruined, I think, the feel of expansion teams because they came out and so many of the guys that they picked just had their breakout seasons in year 1, and Vegas has not missed the playoffs as a team yet, which is remarkable. But Seattle's kind of doing the more expected route. They're using their biggest assets, which are cap space and draft capital, to continue to build out their franchise. And by trading a couple guys like Mark Giordano away, who had no future in Seattle, to getting a bunch of draft picks, I think it's looking really good out in Seattle. I think in a couple of years' time, especially with the next 2 drafts being as loaded as they are, I think Seattle's going to be in great shape for the future. I think they did a great job this deadline, picking up a couple draft picks here and there all around and just building that arsenal going forward. But for the losers, for me, I kept referencing this trade. It's Tampa Bay Lightning and that Hagel trade. Look, Tampa Bay is one of the best teams in the league. They're trying to three-peat. They're fantastic. Their lineup is loaded. And they go and trade 2 first-round picks and 2 prospects for a player that's probably going to slot in their middle 6, might be even their 3rd line. Now, Hagel's a player with term and he's young, which is obviously going to cost a premium, right? That's obviously going to cost a lot in a trade, and that's what they had to give up. But he's a player that they don't really need. It feels like they're making a trade for trade's sake. Just because Florida makes a couple big deals, Tampa feels that they need to stay 1 for 1 and try and keep up. And I just don't think Tampa really needs to do that because once this magical run of theirs ends, which, look, their players are getting over, Stamkos is getting older, Kucherov's getting older, this magical run's not going to last forever. They've been a team that's had to have trouble with the cap in the last couple of years. And now Hagel's going to help with that because he's not getting paid that much. But I just think eventually they're going to need to start using these first-round picks and having these prospects come up and just mortgaging the future away for a guy who's having a really nice season in Chicago, but mortgaging that future for guys maybe going to be in the third line, maybe second line if you're lucky. I just don't think that's very wise for Tampa Bay, and it just felt like they were making a trade just to make a trade and say that they did something.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think Julian Breezeball really wanted a guy like Blake Coleman, who's now with the Calgary Flames. Blake Coleman was a big part of their back-to-back Stanley Cup run, and Hagel was kind of the same makeup, I guess, of that, typical middle six forward that can really do it all, is good on the wall, is good on the corners, wins you 50-50 battles. I think it was a bit of an overpayment giving 2 first-round picks up for a middle six guy, but I think he'll fit well in Tampa, sliding in that line with Anthony Cirelli and Nick Paul, another addition. We are just going to see if these additions propel these teams to a deep playoff run. That'll do it for this edition of Penn State Sports Night. For Mac Young and Chris Lemmo, I'm Jacob Cheris, and have a great night.
Hey everybody, thank you for tuning into this edition of Penn State Sports Night. We hope you liked that segment.
And we're sure there's other Penn State Sports Night segments that you are going to love as well. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content.
And check us out on social media for updates and behind the scenes clips and pics. Follow us on Twitter at PSSN TV and on Instagram at PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action.
For all of us here at the Belisari Media Center, we are
Penn State Sports Night.